Support for NPR and Where We Come From is provided by I Am an Immigrant, a project of Forward.US Education Fund. For Immigrant Heritage Month, we're lifting up the contributions of all immigrants serving in frontline roles to combat the pandemic. Hear their stories at iamanimmigrant.com/IHM.
You know, my feelings about small town Nebraska in general, I don't want people to ever take away that I absolutely hate everything about it. Because at the end of the day, I feel very Nebraskan. I just wish that growing up, people also viewed me as Nebraskan as I felt. And it's unfortunate to have to visit a small town whose culture you like in so many ways. And the main thing that comes to mind is all the instances growing up where people told you how much they didn't like having you or your family around. So, Cameron, do you remember the first time we met? And if you do, tell me what that was like. What do you remember?
Yeah, I remember the first time we met because you were coming in as a recruit for the speech team. You stood out right away as somebody that was probably ahead of some of the other students and maybe a little bit aware that you were ahead of some of the other students. So you certainly came off like you knew, you thought you knew what you were saying, regardless.
So I was very conceited. Obviously, you've had students coming into your speech team before me that have had to deal with immigration some way or another. What is your general understanding of the immigrant experience here in the U.S.?
I had some familiarity with people that had immigrated to the U.S., but I probably didn't know much more about the lived experience of an immigrant in the United States until I was able to have kind of deeper conversations about like the logistical intricacies of how complicated and complex life can be.
I do consider myself a dreamer, but I'm not somebody who has deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, which is what people normally think about when they talk about dreamers. I have a different immigration status called temporary protected status, TPS. And I'm not going to get into the legal intricacies of what are the differences between the two. But generally, TPS is a humanitarian program where the U.S. government has said your country of origin cannot handle the return of every single one of the citizens from that country. And in order to avoid creating more instability in your country of origin, in my case, El Salvador, I cannot be deported to El Salvador. And I've had that immigration status for now over, I believe it's 20 years now. I grew up in a very, I'll just say it, a very racist town. I grew up in Fremont, Nebraska, which in the early 2010s made a bunch of news because they had an ordinance saying that landlords cannot rent property to undocumented immigrants. That created a big stir up, and I remember growing up, taking grocery store trips with my parents. You get looks, you get people that say things. As a child, you have to bear the weight of whatever it is they're telling your parents. Sometimes you have to intermediate a conversation that is basically just a bunch of insults. My parents are not undocumented, but a lot of people in a town like this, they see a person who speaks Spanish and they think, oh, that person has to be undocumented. Whenever I would have to translate things like that to them, my parents would always be very flustered. My dad taught me to respond to them and say, well, just tell them that we're here legally. You know, I have my ID. And I would have to look at my dad and tell him, Dad, he doesn't care. Growing up with that kind of trauma, and at the same time going to a school system where you weren't taught anything about your history. Attending college at the big city, right? Omaha's the big city, right? Taking a Intro to Latin America class, while at the same time joining a speech team, I thought, you know, this is an opportunity for me to get to know myself better and maybe to talk about something that I never got the chance to talk to people about. I viewed that as kind of a breakthrough in my life. Finally I'm talking about this, even though I spent 18 years of my life not talking about it at all.
But then TPS came into the conversation more, and that did start to impact you more, right?
President Trump has made another consequential decision regarding immigrants in this country.
More than 200,000 Salvadoran immigrants could be forced to leave the U.S.
20-year-old César Magaña Linares was 2 years old when he and his parents were granted TPS under the Bush administration.
When I first read about the news, it was a bit of a fight, flight, freeze response. In the moment I had to freeze because I didn't even know what to think. I ended up being late to work because I just sat in my car for like 15 or 20 minutes, not really knowing how to process the information, because I had found out several months earlier that I actually had an outstanding deportation order.
You have reached the EOIR Automated Case Information System.
I was working in a law office, and I had a worker in a different office, neighboring hours, and he told me, well, there's a hotline that you can call, and it's an automated toll-free number, and you just give them your alien registration number, and they tell you whether there's been anything happening on your case. So he actually dialed in for me at that exact moment and found out I've had an outstanding deportation order against me since 2000.
The immigration judge
ordered removal on your case on
August 25th, 2000.
So I had been living my whole life with an outstanding deportation order, which the only reason the government can enforce it is because of my TPS. So now that TPS is gone, and I'm sitting in my car wondering, they can deport me now.
It's hard to, come to terms with the fact that you might have to defend your family from deportation.
It was more emotionally exhausting for me, and it culminated into something that I hadn't experienced before at the end of that week, which you were present there for. So we go to this national tournament. It's a 2-day tournament, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and at the very end of that Sunday, I was hanging out with one of my teammates, and I all of a sudden felt really lightheaded. And then all of a sudden I felt like I needed to sit down, and that didn't work. And then I realized I had to get away. So I physically got up and just told my teammate who was next to me, I can't do this, I'm sorry. And I just stormed off into a hallway where I knew nobody was. And as I started walking, I felt myself just kind of break down, and I started crying. I cried a lot. At that point, I realized that, you can do as much as you can to fight and be an advocate and become educated on these issues, but you can't do anything about your vulnerabilities. And I've never felt more vulnerable at any time in a setting where I typically feel very strong, in an academic setting. I have never felt more vulnerable in a setting like that.
I'd never seen you so vulnerable. And at that point, I had known you for a while. You were hiding. You literally hid from everything. When I realized that you had cornered yourself in that way is when I learned, this is a lot more than the tournament. And I think it really made me take inventory of all the things that you had going on, and about how much the news of TPS and what that means, not from a cold, clinical, political standpoint, but for you as a person, what it really meant for you as a person. And I haven't taken for granted what I learned in seeing your vulnerabilities and seeing how even the funny kid with his chicken nuggets and his political arguments can put up walls, that they're not still being affected by things that we don't always see.
I think at that time I thought, it's better to collect myself now, because there's nothing I could do in this moment that will fix this long term. So all I could do is ground myself and keep going. And having you there, talking to me, helping me understand what was affecting me personally in that moment, but nevertheless reminding me to be resilient, was exactly what I needed.
Do you feel safe in the U.S. right now?
The short answer is, I feel fine personally. When I think about all immigrants in this country, I'm uncertain. And I think that's the story most immigrants will tell you, is that it's just so much uncertainty, and it has been that way for a long time. That's not something that was unique to the Trump administration. But the uncertainty is there, and I think it's going to be there until somebody chooses to act decisively. And despite all of the things that I just talked about, where I told you how much life was tough in this country, I still want to stay. And I hope that we can dismantle the systems of power that make immigrants live through all this trauma and still want to kick them out.